Imagine standing right at the edge of the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. It's this thin strip of land cutting right across the Korean peninsula.
Yeah, it's a really strange place.
It really is full of contradictions, isn't it? Like, on one hand, it's become this accidental wildlife haven, untouched for years.
Right, amazing biodiversity there.
But then on the other hand, it's just bristling with tension. You've got tunnels, potential skirmishes, those massive propaganda loudspeakers constantly blaring.
It's intense. President Clinton called it the Cold War's last divide.
And you can see why. Almost 2 million troops, including, what, 37,000 U.S. soldiers,
Huh?
all on hair-trigger alert.
It's arguably the riskiest place for American overseas commitments.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We're diving into this really fascinating, sometimes quite tragic history of North and South Korea since the division.
It's a story of these intertwined fates, but paths that went in wildly different directions. Constant tension.
And our main guide here is Don Oberdorfer's book, The Two Koreas, a contemporary history.
He had incredible access, didn't he? Oh, yeah, unique access. He met presidents, foreign ministers, traveled there a lot as a journalist.
So the book gives us this amazing inside look at the big decisions, the, secret talks that shaped everything.
It really does.
So our mission today is to give you that high-impact overview, like a Blinkist-style summary, hitting the key moments, the main players, the underlying stuff from the book that explains this still-divided peninsula.
And what's so compelling is how this one nation, shared history, shared culture, was split and then evolved into two such fundamentally different places.
Right.
So we'll look at those moments that really cemented the division and that constant push-pull between rivalry and maybe a tiny bit of hope for reconciliation.
So where did it all begin? Because it wasn't a natural split, was it? It happened really fast.
No, very suddenly, right at the chaotic end of World War II.
Which raises the question. The Allies had promised a free and independent Korea in the Cairo Declaration back in '43. How did that become division?
Well, basically, in the very last days of the war, Soviet troops were pouring into Manchuria, heading towards Korea. The U.S. Panicked a little. They needed a plan, fast, for accepting the Japanese surrender there.
And they used a National Geographic map, is that right?
That's the story. Two young U.S. officers, Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel, they had this urgent task, carve out a U.S. zone. Quickly.
Wow.
They didn't know much about Korea, but they needed a line. So they picked the 38th parallel, roughly halfway and crucially north of Seoul.
Just an arbitrary line on a map.
Pretty much. That became the boundary. Soviet occupation north, U.S. south. The Soviets pulled out in '48 after setting up Kim Il-sung's regime. The U.S. followed suit in '49.
And then?
And then, well, that line became a flashpoint. Civil war basically started breaking out almost immediately along that boundary before escalating massively.
Oh, that initial fighting just exploded.
It really did. June 25th, 1950, North Korea invades the South, full scale, backed by the Soviets, and later huge numbers of Chinese troops came in. They aimed to reunify the whole peninsula by force.
And the world jumped in. The U.S., South Korea, loads of other countries under the UN banner pushed back.
Right, but then the Chinese intervened massively to save the North, pushed the lines back and forth again, a brutal 3 years.
What was the bigger impact of that war beyond Korea itself?
Oh, huge. The Korean War was a massive turning point globally. It really pushed the U.S. into major rearmament after WWII, tripled military spending, doubled troops in Europe, bolstered NATO.
So it kind of solidified the Cold War lines.
Exactly. And it cemented the China-Soviet alliance for a while and made the U.S. and China enemies for like 20 years.
And for Korea, the peninsula itself.
Well, when the fighting stopped in July '53, the armistice line was basically back where it started, near the 38th parallel. That created the DMZ, that buffer zone.
But the real impact was deeper than just the line, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The war hardened everything, ideology, politics. It turned political opposition into this deep, visceral hatred between ordinary people. It shattered 13 centuries of Korean unity. That, I think, was the war's most profound legacy.
And from that point on, North and South just went down incredibly different roads, almost mirror images.
Totally. North Korea developed under Kim Il-sung's Juche ideology. It translates as self-reliance, but experts say it's more like the state religion, Korea as a chosen land.
Right.
And it became this dynastic thing, unique in the communist world. Huge focus on the military, total state control.
The book talks about some pretty intense social engineering, too, like pushing women into the workforce.
Yeah, partly to revolutionize them, but also practically because so many men were in the army. 80% of farm workers were women at one point.
And the state nurseries for millions of kids.
Right, 3.5 million, taking care of kids, but also, instilling ideology from a very young age, a powerful tool for control.
Meanwhile, the South, after some authoritarian rule.
Yeah, under Syngman Rhee, then Park Chung-hee, they went for the economic miracle, rapid industrialization.
Driven by Park's big plans.
Partly, yeah. His heavy and chemical industry plan, focusing on cars, ships, electronics for export, building that economic base.
And the gap just grew and grew. When did the South actually pull ahead?
Mid-70s, South Korea's per capita GNP surpassed the North's for the first time. That was a big psychological moment.
And by 88.
South Korea's economy was at least 7 times bigger, just a massive difference.
Which pushed the North towards becoming an aid-based state, as the book calls it.
Exactly. Especially in the 90s, their planned economy just tanked, estimated to have shrunk by a quarter between 1990 and 95 alone. It really became 2 different worlds economically.
And the leaders, they were central to all this. Kim Il-sung versus Park Chung-hee. Very different guys.
Oh, completely. Kim, the sort of charismatic guerrilla fighter, outgoing, larger than life.
Right, the revolutionary figure.
And Park, he's served in the Japanese army, even took a Japanese name, seemed much more reserved, small, wiry, sometimes aloof.
There's that weird detail in the book about him during an interview.
Oh, the Chihuahua.
Yeah, this powerful, feared leader just playing with a tiny dog on his lap, barely making eye contact. What do you make of that?
It's definitely striking. Maybe it suggests a kind of hidden nervousness or just a way to keep distance. Hard to say. But he consolidated power with his Yushin system.
Presented as revitalizing reforms.
Right, that was the official line. But the U.S. ambassador at the time basically said, look, this is just to keep Park in power for another 12 years, minimum, with less opposition. It was authoritarianism, plain and simple. Security forces cracking down on the press daily.
And the main opposition voice was Kim Dae-jung.
Yes, Park's rival. He was lucky in a way. He was in Japan when Yushin was declared, so he could keep criticizing from abroad until
he was kidnapped from Tokyo.
Yeah.
Widely blamed on South Korean agents, right?
Yeah, that incident really galvanized the opposition against Park, both at home and internationally.
Okay, then Park gets assassinated in 79. What happens next?
Well, technically, Prime Minister Choi Kyu-ha takes over. Martial law is declared. But the real power grab happens pretty quickly. General Chen Du-han leads a military takeover.
He was different from Park, wasn't he? Spent time in the U.S.
Yeah, U.S. military schools. So he seemed more comfortable with Americans. There's that funny story about him being impressed by an American stopping at a red light late at night.
Seriously?
Yeah, he saw it as the sign of law-abiding spirit, essential for freedom and democracy. Kind of ironic, coming from a coup leader.
A bit, yeah. And his successor, Roh Tae-woo.
Also part of that 79 coup, but seen as maybe more cautious, more calculating than Chen.
Okay, back to the north. Kim Il-sung sets up this dynasty, grooming his son, Kim Jong-il.
Who is very different. Grew up rich, into movies apparently, not the guerrilla background. Initially seemed awkward in public.
He was called the party center for years, right? Very mysterious.
Exactly. And when he took over, he really leaned on the military. Most of his public stuff was visiting army units.
And the book mentions he only traveled abroad twice before the late 90s.
That's right. Very reclusive. Which makes that other story even stranger. The kidnapping of the South Korean actress and director.
Shin Sang-ok and Choi Eun-hee. He actually admitted doing it.
Yep, on a secret tape they made later. He told them he kidnapped them because he absolutely needed them to improve North Korea's films. It's just wild. Shows his level of control and priorities.
So while these leaders are doing their thing, the DMZ isn't quiet. It's this stage for hostility, but also attempts at talks.
That's the paradox. Yeah, you had tunnel incidents, infiltrators, shootouts, constant friction. But then, sometimes, they try to connect.
Like the Red Cross talks in 71, to reunite families.
Right. 18 years after the war ended, first real attempt.
And the book has that detail about the KCIA reception in Seoul, with the gorgeous young women dressed up as Red Cross volunteers.
Chuckles. Yeah, it's a bit bizarre, trying to impress the North Koreans with South Korea's glamour, I guess. But it also shows how staged these things were.
And those talks didn't go well anyway.
No, very difficult. The North Koreans used it as a propaganda platform, praising Kim Il-sung. It actually backfired, angered the South Korean public, who were initially hopeful.
And violence kept breaking out, too, like the assassination attempt on Park in 74.
By a Korean resident of Japan using a Japanese police pistol. That caused huge friction between Seoul and Tokyo.
And the 76 poplar tree incident? That sounded incredibly dangerous.
Oh, it was. North Korean guards killing 2 U.S. officers over trimming a tree in the joint security area. It almost led to a wider war.
The U.S. response, Operation Paul Bunyan, they considered serious options.
Very serious. Everything from laying mines to apparently even talk of exploding a nuke at sea as a warning.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they just went in with massive force to cut down the tree, but it showed how fast things could escalate. A small incident, huge potential consequences.
And the big powers, U.S., China, Soviets, they were always involved, weren't they? Making things more complicated.
Always. Like the U.S. opening to China in the early 70s, Kissinger's secret trip, that really spooked Park Chung-hee in the South.
He saw it as a betrayal.
The second American betrayal, yeah, after the division itself, made him question how much he could rely on the U.S.
Then Carter wanted to pull U.S. troops out. That caused a stir.
Huge stir. Carter questioned stationing troops overseas after Vietnam. Apparently, he even told Reagan he wished he had the power Korean presidents had to draft dissenters.
Wow.
But there was massive pushback within his own government, Congress, from Japan, the military. So it got delayed and eventually didn't fully happen then. Koreagate didn't help either.
Meanwhile, the Soviets and Chinese were shifting, too.
Yeah, mid-'80s, Gorbachev starts Nordpolitik, cautiously building ties with South Korea, seeking economic links.
Which worried Kim Il-sung.
Big time. He felt sidelined, ignored by his traditional allies, just like he thought was happening with China and the U.S.
The '88 Seoul Olympics must have been a massive moment for the South.
Absolutely huge, a coming-out party. North Korea tried to get a boycott or co-hosting, but the Soviets and Eastern Bloc showed up anyway.
Wow.
Athletes wanted to compete, for one. But also, Soviet TV coverage showed Russian South Korea in a new light. Seeing Koreans cheer for Soviet teams, it challenged their views.
So that, plus the South's economy.
Made it impossible for Moscow and then Beijing to keep ignoring Seoul. By '92, China basically forced Kim Il-sung to accept both Koreas joining the UN, told him Deng Xiaoping ordered it, left the North with little choice, a major shift in alliances.
And amidst all this geopolitical maneuvering, this other massive issue surfaces, North Korea's nuclear program.
Right. By '89, when the first Bush administration came in, U.S. satellites showed a serious program at Yongbyon.
Was it secret?
Surprisingly, not that well hidden. You could apparently see it from the Pyongyang airport. Some think inaction early on was partly because policymakers just didn't want to deal with how incredibly difficult the problem was.
And the U.S. itself had nukes in the South for a while.
Oh, yes. Publicly acknowledged in the '70s, they even flew warheads near the DMZ in exercises as a signal. Defense Secretary Schlesinger in '75 publicly said using tactical nukes would be carefully considered if needed. So nukes weren't entirely new to the equation there. While the North went down the Jewish military-first nuclear path, the South had its own internal drama moving towards democracy.
Right, after Park's assassination in '79, things were unstable.
Very. Acting president, martial law, then General Chen Du-hwan takes power in that December 12th military coup. The U.S. Embassy watched it happen, alarmed by the military ignoring civilian control, and even the U.S. RO combined command structure.
That period included the Gwangju Uprising in 1980, didn't it?
Yes, a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protests. A real spar.
But the democracy movement kept pushing.
Absolutely. Opposition figures like Kim Dae-jung, students, the public, demanding direct elections, end to martial law.
Kim Dae-jung was sentenced to death under Chung.
He was. It was commuted after huge international pressure, including from President Carter to Reagan during the transition, a close call.
And that pressure finally led to elections in '87.
Yes, direct presidential elections.
Oh.
Won by Roh Tae-woo, who was part of the '79 coup, but still it marked a major transition, even if imperfect, towards democracy.
It's interesting how South Korea's internal politics sometimes affected North-South relations, like Kim Young-sam being tough on aid during the famine.
Right, partly for domestic political reasons before an election. He even tried to stop the U.S. giving aid, but the U.S. went ahead anyway. Shows the friction sometimes.
And then, those trials. Chun and Roh, former presidents, on trial for treason and bribery.
Incredible, wasn't it? In 1996. Stemming from the coup and their time in office, they were convicted, then eventually pardoned by Kim Young-sam in '97. Caused a lot of debate about justice.
So despite all the hostility, there were still these recurring attempts at dialogue, often secret.
Yeah, this cycle. The mid-80s had a surprising burst of talks, economic, Red Cross, even parliamentary contacts.
And the family reunions in '85 must have been incredibly emotional.
Oh, hugely. First time in decades. For many, very limited, but powerful.
And secret meetings, too. Chun meeting North Korean envoys.
Yes, at some fancy mansion outside Seoul. Chun apparently wanted to show off. Later, South Korean intel chiefs met Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang. Some thought they were close to a summit deal, others thought it was just North Korean games.
But crises always seem to interrupt things, like the Rangoon bombing in '83.
Horrific. A North Korean bomb targeting South Korean officials in Burma. And it happened the same day the North sent a message saying they were open to talks with the U.S. and South. Just shows the contradictions.
And the North's economy got really bad in the '90s. Famine, asking for aid.
Desperate times, negative growth, food shortages. They even asked Seoul for secret rice shipments, but the South said no, claiming it was impossible to hide in their open society. Shows the system differences.
There were even signs of trouble in the North Korean military.
Yeah, late 95, reports of a whole army corps being disbanded, winter drills cut short for ideology sessions, possibly resource shortages, maybe discipline issues. But paradoxically, the military seemed to gain more political power under Kim Jong-il.
Which brings us to the biggest crisis of that period, the nuclear standoff in the mid-90s.
Right. North Korea initially agreed to inspections, then balked, especially at two suspect sites the IAEA wanted to see based on U.S. intel.
They call them military sites.
Yeah, refused special inspections. Then in '93, they announced they withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Big alarm bells went off everywhere.
The U.S. feared they could get enough plutonium for bombs quickly.
Yeah, one or two bombs fast, maybe a whole arsenal later. For blackmail? Or even selling them.
So Defense Secretary Perry thought stopping them was worth the risk of war.
He did. Led to coercive diplomacy talks backed by threat of force. Serious planning for sanctions, military action, even a massive counterattack towards Pyongyang if needed.
Things got really tense. The sea of fire threat from the north.
And South Korea's defense minister publicly outlining their war plan, which actually makes South Koreans super nervous, thinking the U.S. might start something.
And into that tension steps Jimmy Carter.
Yep, former President Carter. Private mission, June '94. Meets Kim Il-sung, gets an offer for a North-South summit.
Which never happened because Kim Il-sung died just weeks later.
Exactly. His death created uncertainty, but also maybe opened the door for the deal that followed. The 1994 agreed framework.
That was the deal. North Korea freezes its program.
In exchange for light water reactors and heavy fuel oil from an international group led by the U.S.
Tough negotiations, though. Sticking points.
Oh, yeah. Timing of inspections, who supplies the reactors. South Korea really insisted it had to be them, publicly acknowledged. Lots of friction there, too.
The U.S. negotiator, Gallucci, felt the pressure was key.
He did. The threat of sanctions, the U.S. military buildup. He thought that combination pushed Pyongyang back to the table wanting a deal. Political military coordination, as he put it.
So Kim Il-sung dies July '94. First communist dynasty passes power to the son. Kim Jong-il, the party center.
Formally takes over, yeah. Different style, as we said, less charismatic, background in party stuff, movies, propaganda, really focused on the military-first politics.
And still quite reclusive.
Very. Few trips abroad. And yeah, that kidnapping story still hangs there as just bizarre.
Under Kim Jong-il, especially later in the '90s,
yeah,
the North really becomes that aid-based state, driven by the economy.
Desperate times, yeah. Negative growth, famine aftermath. They even amended the Constitution, brought in younger technocrats, tried hints of market reforms, Chinese style, all driven by sheer economic necessity.
But the regime itself stayed solid. Stability within instability.
Seemed that way from outside. Despite the economic chaos, maybe signs of military trouble, Kim Jong-il appeared firmly in control, mainly through the military.
And flashpoints kept happening. The '96 submarine incident.
Right. Subruns aground, 26 North Koreans ashore, massive manhunt, finding infiltrators executed by their own side. Grim stuff.
And the '99 naval clash in the LOC.
South Korea felt they won that one decisively, taught the North a lesson. But it also stalled dialogue efforts. Military clashes always complicate diplomacy.
Then came the big breakthrough moment, the 2000 summit. Kim Jong-il meets South Korean President Kim Dae-jung. Why did that happen?
Good question. Mix of factors, probably. North's dire economy, definitely. International pressure after the nuclear crisis. Maybe Kim Jong-un's sunshine policy of engagement built some trust. Hard to know Kim Jong-il's exact motives.
But it was historic. Kim Jong-il steps out of the shadows.
Huge moment, first ever meeting between leaders of North and South. But even then, people wondered, real change or just tactics?
We should also mention Huang Zhengyup, the high-level defector in '97.
Oh yeah, major defection. The architect of Juche ideology, he was critical of the military's dominance, worried about war, urged the South to send food, but also, interestingly, told them to beef up their own military and intelligence. Complex message.
Okay, so looking back at all this,
Mhm.
the division, the war, the different paths, the leaders, the crises, the nukes, what are the big takeaways for understanding this relationship?
Well, if you zoom out, a few things really stand out consistently. First, that fundamental ideological clash. Juche versus South Korea's evolving democracy and global integration. They're just profoundly different systems.
Right.
Second, the constant meddling or influence of outside powers. US, China, Russia, Japan. Their interests always shape what happens on the peninsula, sometimes helping, often complicating.
Good.
Internal politics within both North and South. The leaders mattered hugely. Their personalities, their power bases, how they approached the rivalry or the possibility of talks.
Oberdorfer really captures those paradoxes, doesn't he? The DMZ being hostile and a sanctuary.
Yeah.
The cycle of tension and talks.
Exactly. And he points out how both Kim Il-sung and Park Chung-hee, they talked about unification, but neither wanted it on the other's terms. Without outside pressure, which was often inconsistent, genuine dialogue struggled to take root.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Decades of history. Division, war, divergence, leaders, crises, nukes, talks. It's packed with drama, emotion, and real consequences.
And the peninsula's location, right there between major powers in Northeast Asia, means what happens there always has ripples, regionally and globally. It still does.
And the story isn't over. That's the thing. Despite hopeful moments, the division is still very real.
Deeply ingrained.
So, thinking about all this history today, here's something for you to chew on. Given everything we've talked about, the deep ideologies, the powerful militaries on both sides, the constant outside influences, is genuine reunification really on the cards anytime soon? Or is the peninsula kind of stuck in this state of stability within instability, always near the edge, forever the Cold War's last divide?